So it sounds like there's a real mixture of companies on the call, of where people are from on the call as well. And it's such a pleasure to be able to spend the next hour with you all. If you've just jumped on the call, then just a quick reminder, if you can turn on your camera, that would be absolutely wonderful to see your faces. If you don't have the capacity to, then do not worry. But part of the reason for that is because during this call, I'd love to make it a little bit interactive for you guys as well, so you can get as much from the session as possible. So just before we launch into some of that, I'd love to give you a bit of context as to who I am and what I do. I'm hoping you guys all know about Assembly F already. This is their third webinar that they are running. And so it's 3 is obviously a lucky number. So this is going to be a good webinar. And for those of you that have just joined on, my name is Ginny. I work as a pitch coach. And I work with some of the biggest tech companies in the world, like Microsoft and Google, and also some of the best accelerators like Techstars, Startupbootcamp. And that's here in London where I'm based, and then across in the US, in Asia, and throughout Europe as well. So normally I would be traveling the world, but now I'm amazingly being able to see lots of different faces from my living room, as you can see behind me here. In this webinar, we cannot obviously cover everything pitch coaching, but what I'd love to do with you is to give you some context as to some really good tips on how you frame your content really well. And then a couple of things on delivery also, because as you would have realized, everything is now happening digitally through these video calls. And where there are some things which are slightly different, there are also some of the classic things you need to take into account, like what you're doing with your face, your body language, tonality of voice. And my background is that I originally trained as an actor. And so I'd love to give you some technique that actors use before they go on stage or when they're on screen, just to make sure that their message is coming across in a really strong way. One of the things that drives everything I do is that I truly believe that when people are speaking to an audience, they can actually inspire the person in front of them. But what we sometimes do, and I'm sure this applies for none of you on the call, is that we can occasionally bore our audience. Or maybe we do one better than that and we slightly pique our audience's interest. We get them a little bit excited. And in the UK, where people are a little bit passive when you're speaking to them, that means that maybe your audience nod at you. And it feels like you've won some sort of competition. But there is so much more that you could do when you're speaking to people, whether you're trying to get investment or you're trying to grow your team or grow your customer base. You can actually inspire people that you speak to. So one thing I'd love to hear just as we kick off, and feel free to use the chat function to do this, which you'll find there's a chat button on the bottom of the screen and it will appear on the right-hand side of your screen, is just to hear from you guys, what are some of the challenges that you are experiencing when you're pitching virtually? When you're either in calls, if you are a startup builder or a community builder, or if you're a founder, what are some of the things, the technical difficulties, or just things that are hard when you are trying to get people's attention online? So feel free to jot some things in the chat, and then what I might do is ask some people just to unmute themselves and share a little bit more of what they've said. So feel free to get involved on the chat on the side, and then I'll read some comments as they come in. It'll be really interesting to hear from you guys as well. Go for it. I can see people typing. I can see some quizzical faces as well. I'll give you a few just while you're thinking as some sort of food for thought. A lot of people I've been speaking to recently have been talking about this weird thing, which is trying to work out if people are actually listening to them or paying attention, or if it's landing at all. And it's partly because, and I feel like I experience this every time I jump into a webinar, you get so much less feedback than you might normally do in a face-to-face conversation. So I'm just going to go to the chat just to see what some of you guys are saying. And Olga, you said, I always have too little time to say everything I need. I think that might be something which is universally felt of, you'd always like more time to pitch. And it always feels like there's too little time to say everything you need. I was reading something amazing the other day about I think it was back in 1963, don't quote me on the date of this, but back when James Watson and Francis Crick decided to present to the world the double helix structure, their presentation was just 5 minutes long. So they were talking about one of possibly the greatest discoveries of the 20th century, and they did it in 5 minutes. So when people say to me, I don't have enough time to pitch, I normally point them to that presentation and go, there's a lot you can say in a very short amount of time. It's just about how you put together your content in a really clever way. Let's hear from a few more people then. So who is this? Ashney, and please tell me when I say your name wrong. I hate saying people's names wrong.
You just did it.
I did it wrong?
It's all right. Yeah, but it's all right. It's Arseni.
Arseni. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I will try and remember
right.
that as best as I
That's
can.
all right.
So you said here that there's no way to read the body language and it limits connection with the audience. Can you just keep yourself unmuted for a second? Tell us a little bit more as to what you mean by that, why that might be tricky when you're trying to speak to people on a call.
Yeah, well, there are two situations, of course, where the camera is on for the listener and where it's off. And so where it's off is the worst. You know, you're just speaking in emptiness, and basically you can't really understand whether you're going to the right direction, whether you are too technical or you should go a bit maybe less technical or vice versa. So it's the worst case. You just don't know what's the better way to head in. Then when the person is with camera, it's a bit better because you actually see the face and maybe you even see part of their body. But still, you know, the connection isn't always at best quality, so you can't get instant feedback.
Yeah.
So basically, it's similar with this emptiness thing, but you still can read something, but not everything. So that limits a bit this the maybe impact of your message. That's how I feel.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Not having feedback is so tricky, and I think it's interesting that all of the tech challenges that people are experiencing online are actually quite a nice leveler. I was overhearing a call the other day. My husband works for the government, and somebody really senior was on a call with him, and their internet kept on cutting out, and then their dog kept on jumping up and down in the background. And it was so interesting because there's all these things that normally, when you have quite important people in positions of authority, they get up on stage and they speak and they really manage to hold the room. But right now we're all experiencing things, like technical issues in particular, which none of us are immune to. They just sometimes happen. And it can be very hard just to work out how you move around those and still hold the audience's attention. I'm just gonna go back to the chat because there's a couple of other things that people have said. So somebody said they're having their first video pitching. Oh, okay, great. They were just saying they're about to do their first video pitching and they're looking forward to getting some advice. And then Cameron, thank you for your input there about it sounds like you can't quite turn on your laptop or turn on your video because you have a child sleeping on your lap, so that is fine. Thank you for letting us know. The next thing I'd love you guys to get involved with on the chat is just some thoughts around how you would like to be coming across in conversations. I often say to clients that I work with that unless you have something that you're aiming towards when you're communicating with people, it's really hard to get there. So one question I'd like you to consider is, what would you like to either leave your audience with when you finish pitching or when you finish a conversation with them, or how would you like to be perceived? So another way of thinking about this question is, if you were on a call with somebody and then you thought the call had ended, or they thought the call had ended, and they started to speak to somebody else about how you came across. So like you overheard somebody speaking about you, what would you like to hear them say about the way that you communicate, and what would you hate to hear people describe you as? So just as you're thinking and just as you're typing some questions, some answers, it'd be really interesting to hear how you would like to be perceived as a communicator. And for me, I like to come across as energetic, partly because that's just in my personality to be quite engaged and positive as a communicator. And I would hate if I finished a webinar or I finished a talk and somebody said that was really boring. So just get involved in the chat. How would you like to be perceived when you communicate, and what would you not like to be perceived as? Go for a mixture of the both. I don't mind which one you refer to, but feel free to jot some things down in the chat. Or if you're brave enough, you are very welcome to unmute yourself and just share your answer. And I can slightly manage people jumping on top of themselves. If you just maybe raise your hand before you go and I can see who wants to speak, that's maybe another way of doing it as well. I'll just repeat the question in case people are stuck. Go for it. I can see you've got your hand up.
Okay, so the point is that being the startup founders, we could be either pitching to the investors, we could be inviting people on the team, or we could be asking customers to get benefited with our service or the product or whatever what we're doing. So the pitch would be different, and in all the pitches, we would like the people to work around our call to action.
Yeah. So that's what you would like to be able to do by the end of your pitch, that no matter
Yes.
who your audience is, that people are responding to the call to action.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
great. And what do you think that takes for people to want to respond, or for that clarity to happen at the end of the call? What does that demand on your end?
Well, for investors, it would be like asking for funds. For the team,
Yeah.
it would be like coming on board to work with us either on equity or on pay.
Yeah. Okay, so that's almost like on the content side of things. I almost mean on like the delivery end as well. What is it? What did people need from you to be able to, like, I guess you're asking for people to trust you in that call you have. Yeah, great.
Yeah. So trust would be the prime objective, I think, and the believability on the product or the delivery of the product.
Great. So trust in the delivery of the project. There's a little bit of both in there. Thank you so much for explaining that one for us. Feel free, somebody else, to jump in as well. And in the meantime, I'll just read out the next comment. So Ashne, and I know I've said your name wrong. Please excuse me. You said, I aim to excite people about what I do. I want to come across as confident and credible, as well as being able to connect with a person easily. Lovely. So it's about exciting people and coming across as really confident and credible. Those are great words. I think there's a few nods as I'm watching people who have their videos on. So it sounds like you've got some people agreeing with you on those fronts. I think most people want to come across as credible. There aren't many people who would like to come across as kind of stupid or less informed, but I think it's a really nice thing to be aiming for. And I'll come to that a little bit later on, as a few things that you can do just to allow your audience to get very quickly in your pitch that you are somebody who is credible and worth listening to. Let's hear from a few other people. Those of you who haven't got your videos on, if you are able to put your video on, that would be great. If not, then please get involved in the chat instead, just to draw you into the conversation as much as possible. Anyone else want to give us a quick thing on how they'd like to come across? Amra, go for it.
Hello, yes, thank you. Hello everyone, I did not introduce myself before. My name is Amra and I come from Montenegro. I'm a founder of Startup Light for Life, which actually solves the problem of frequent traffic accidents that occur on crosswalks. And basically, this is a really good question. I would like to be perceived as energetic or interesting communicator, which actually gives insightful pitch or whatever. And I would not like to be perceived as a bored pitcher or communicator.
Not as bored. Yeah, I love that. So somebody who carries energy rather than bores people. Really nice. I think one of the things that I'm almost asking you to think of in this question is, how would you like your audience to feel? And I think when we neglect to think about that, then what can often happen is our audience just go through our pitch, come out the other end, and either don't remember much or haven't really experienced anything. And for the pitches that you have sat through, which you really remember, I guarantee you it's either because they did something very unexpected, or because you came away feeling something, like either feeling excited, or it was a slightly shocking pitch, or maybe it was a bad pitch and you slightly cringed as you saw that person. But we as human beings, we are wired to respond by feelings. And so I think that is something that is worth bearing in mind, is what would you like your audience to feel? I love what you said here, Narendran, of first and foremost to be understood by the other person. Of course, it's always really nice for somebody to come away with clarity rather than loads of questions. Shah, I think you're sharing your screen. Okay, it's gone now, that's great. And Zain, then you said, be clear and concise without any physical signals. It's often difficult to know if you've gone on too long about a certain point. Very, very true. So on that note, and thank you so much for feeding in those comments, it more than anything just helps me work out how I can be most helpful to you guys in terms of what how you would like to come across as a presenter or a communicator. The next thing I'd love to take you through is a really quick exercise which just gets you thinking a bit about how you tell the story of your company. Or if you don't run your own company, just the story of what you do for the business that you're a part of. And one of the best things that you guys have at your disposal as startup founders or people who work within startup communities is the art of storytelling. In fact, Stanford University did a study a few years ago in which they found that a story, when it's told really well, is 22 times more memorable than a fact, which is it's like a fact in itself. So it's slightly ironic, but it's a true one. And it just describes really the elements that use the elements that make up a story, which are just like Velcro to the brain. It just gets stuck. So I want to teach you a really quick technique, which is called the hero's journey. And it is what a lot of Hollywood films are based off of. You would recognize this if you've watched anything like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars. This is what a lot of the big ones are based off of, unless of course it's a French movie, which look very different, but we won't go into that in too much detail. So I'm just going to pull up a whiteboard and just let me know if you can see this by giving me if you can find on the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a thing which says reactions. And if you can see what I'm about to share with you, then maybe just do a quick reaction just so I can see. So hopefully you guys will be able to see this, but let me know if not. So give me like a clap signal or a thumbs up if you can currently see the whiteboard. Yes, okay, good. All right. So I always teach people not to be condescending in the way they talk about themselves, but really honestly, I'm not an artist, and I will try my best to draw for you this wonderful good diagram. Take it with a pinch of salt. If art is your thing, then do not judge me strongly. So this is the hero's journey, and I'm going to draw it out in a line graph for you. And it starts over this end of the screen, where we find out who the hero of the story is. So if you're thinking about Lord of the Rings, for example, then you'll find out that the hobbits live in the Shire and they have a very nice time. Or if it's Harry Potter, then you find out that Harry lives under the stairs. Or Star Wars, I'm not a big Star Wars fan, but you find out who the characters are and that they're on a mission to do something. Right at the beginning of the story, there is something called the call to action, where the characters are invited to go on a journey, and they normally say yes, otherwise the story just ends there. So in Lord of the Rings, the characters are invited to return the ring to Mordor, or Harry Potter is invited to go to Hogwarts. So they maybe have a kind of a moment of elation right at the beginning, and then very, very quickly, everything ends in disaster. So either it's that the hobbits are captured, or Harry Potter can't find a way of defeating Lord Voldemort. Whatever it is, stuff goes wrong. And this is known as the pit of despair in Hollywood terms. If you're asking questions on the chat, I will come to you in a second, because I probably won't be to multitask right now, but I can see you're asking things. The next thing that happens is a wise mentor gets involved. And this is your Dumbledore, your Gandalf. Yoda is a wise mentor in Star Wars. Or otherwise, it's just somebody normally played by Morgan Freeman. He's a very typical wise mentor character. And they give the characters something they need to get out of the pit and go on their journey to get on with the rest of their mission. At which point then, and that, by the way, was this is my mentor's staff, in case you're wondering what the squiggly stick is. And then once they've got the wisdom or thing that they need, then they come across their dragon, which I'm sure you all guessed it was a dragon anyway, so that's great. And this is my fire-breathing dragon. Apologies if you're offended by my artwork. And they then are able to defeat whatever thing it was that they set out to do. And then their story ends with a kind of happily ever after moment. They get the treasure, they return the ring to Mordor, whatever it is, stuff normally ends well at the end of the story. Unless, of course, as I said, it's a French film. So there you go. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this so none of you have to put up with the artwork anymore. There we go. So that is the hero's journey. And in a second, what I'm going to ask you to do is to think about how you would talk about what you do as an entrepreneur, as a founder, in terms of the hero's journey. So what I'm going to ask you to have a think about is, first of all, if you've got some paper in front of you, great. If you've just got your laptop screen, or you've got like a phone nearby, that might be handy just to write some notes down in a second. But I would like you to write down the top 5 jargon words that you normally use to describe what you do. So just jot them down. They'll be different for all of you, depending on your area of industry, depending on how technically you normally speak. But things like any 3-letter acronyms, talking about, just letters or stuff that, unless I had a certain level of knowledge in your area, I would probably have to think a little bit more about. So just jot some of these down. Maybe 5 or 6 of them, the ones that you use most frequently. And then what I'm going to ask you to do next is you're going to have a go at describing what you do without using any of those words. And I can see slight shock on people's faces, or maybe even hatred. I don't even know, I'm getting confused. And the reason for this, and it's partly because you created the rod for your own back right at the beginning when I asked some of you to introduce who you are and what you do. And if I asked the rest of you as audience members, which of those you could remember? So don't worry, I will repeat the task in a second. Thank you for asking. If I was to ask some of you which of those headlines you remember, I guarantee you would remember very few. And it's partly because for all of you that I asked to introduce yourselves or got involved with that exercise, and this is not your fault at all, you launched into a very technical, jargon-filled headline, which I understood some of them, but otherwise some of them I would have gone straight over my head, and probably some of yours as well. So this is the task. I want you to think of how you would describe what you would do without the 5 jargon words that you've just written down. And you're going to say it as if it's a story. So here are a couple of phrases just to write down, which will help be your kind of pegs that you're going to then pin the story along. So the first line, and you're going to do this really deliberately in storytelling language, like you're speaking to a 5-year-old child, is the first line is once upon a time. So write that down, and all of you can have a go at writing your answer to once upon a time, which will be describing who your customer is and what the situation or problem is. So if I was talking about pitch coaching, I would say, once upon a time, there was a startup founder who had a really big pitch to deliver to 100 people, and they were feeling really nervous. So describe what the struggle is and what the pain is that your customer or the people that you work with will be experiencing. And then the next line you're going to have, and you can flesh that out a bit, please go into more detail than I just did there. The next line you're going to give your for the rest of the story will be one day he discovered that, and then you're going to talk about what he discovered, what he or she discovered. So one day he or she discovered that there is a company called the Ivy Way, which is my company, and they do pitch coaching for startup founders, and they can help people relieve them of the strain and the stress of not knowing how to pitch their startup to their customers. So what is it that they discover in your product or in your service, your platform, whatever it is? And then the next sentence I want you to be the start of the sentence will be because of that. And then you're going to describe your impact in really simple storytelling language. Because of that, what has changed or what could change for your customer? Because of that, they then are able to stand up on a stage, whether it's in front of one person or hundreds, and deliver a pitch that people actually remember. And then the last sentence you're going to do is going to be, and finally. So the start of the sentence will be literally the words, and finally, and then you're talking about the greater impact. And finally, that startup founder was able to raise their next seed round of whatever £1 million. So I'll just write up these sentences in the chat. And then what I'd like you to do is spend a couple of minutes writing out what your story might be using those sentences. And then the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to split you into smaller groups. So if you've not used Zoom before or this feature, then there's this thing called Breakout Rooms. It happens automatically. You don't need to worry about anything. But I'll put you in 2s and 3s with some other people, and you'll have a go at going through that story and getting a bit of feedback as to what people find memorable, what people find interesting, without you using your jargon terms at all. Now, the reason I laughed at some of your faces at the beginning when I said that you looked quite nervous about not using your jargon is because most of you are all of you are very intelligent people, and therefore you will suffer from what is known as the curse of knowledge, which is something Donald Miller, amongst many others, talk about. And it means that you will find it very hard to speak in language other than something very simple. The reason I'm forcing you to do this is if you can find a way of speaking to a 5-year-old child, then you can speak to anybody. And I'm assuming that for a lot of you right now, you are speaking to people speaking to audiences or investors, or just your pool of people that you're speaking to has just got wider. And it's really important to have a language that anybody can understand. So some of you will feel very stupid, go with it, trust the process, it will be good for you. I'm just writing out the lines. So I'll give you 2 more minutes just to write down what your story will be, and then I will put you into teams. So the first line is once upon a time, and then I'll just keep on writing for a second. And if you have any questions on what I'm saying, feel free to just use the chat. I'm fine for you to ask questions, or if you're confused, please tell me. I'm not afraid of people being confused of what I've said. And here's one more thought for you as you're writing the story, which is that when you give, and I didn't do this for you, so I apologize, when you give the customer a name, when you give the hero of a story a name, they're suddenly so much more relatable. So please try, if you can, to name the person you're speaking about. If I'd said to you, David is a startup founder, then, oh, thank you so much, Shah, that's great. If I'd said David is a startup founder, then suddenly you would have a picture of who David is in your mind. And it just makes things a lot easier for your audience. Shah has wonderfully put in the chat the lines that you need to use. So please just reference the chat if you're confused at all, and you will have a little bit of guidance there. Okay, fabulous. All right, I'll give you one more minute just to write some notes, and then I will put you into some groups. I think somebody might have just joined the call, and I can't quite see where you are in my screen. But if you've just joined the call, just to get you up to speed really quickly, people are just writing out very simply what they do as a startup founder or as a community builder. Just writing a really simple storytelling language, who it is they're trying to help, what the pain is, and what is the solution that they're bringing. So if you find yourself in a room in a moment with somebody who's just jumped onto the call, if you could help me out and just explain for them what the task is, that would be really, really helpful. Okay, great.
Hi, sorry, I just missed that. Do I have to introduce myself?
Yes, in a second. So I'll just tell you for everybody, because I'm sure other people have questions as well. So when you get into breakout rooms, which I'm about to send you into, you will have you'll have about 30 seconds to a minute to just explain to the person you're with what your name is, and don't give them too much. Don't launch into a company tagline. Just say what your name is and go straight into the story of what you do. Then your partner or whoever you're with is going to give you some feedback as to what was really memorable from your story and where they maybe wanted a bit more detail, or there was a little bit less storytelling language than they would have liked. What they shouldn't hear is any of your buzzwords and jargon. If you're with somebody who is using loads of jargon, get them to think about how they could reframe that. And then you're going to switch over and go the other way. So the other person will say their story, and then you'll get some feedback. As all of this is happening, I will tell you when you need to switch over. So I'll broadcast a message, which will just come up at the top of your screen, which just says when you need to switch over. And if you have any questions, just give me a shout. All right, I'm about to put you into your groups. I'm just checking the chat in case there's anything. Okay, lovely. People are already getting involved on telling their story in the chat. So Shah, you're about to be put into a room. Just click exit room to come back to the main room. That's the only person it applies for. Anyone else enjoy the storytelling exercise with the person that you've been put with, and in about 3 or 4 minutes I'll draw you back together as well. So I'm just moving people around in some rooms. Okay, great. All right, I'll see you in a bit. Great, and I'll just ask the question again as people are coming back into the room. Make sure if you answer any of my questions, feel free to unmute yourself, just so that that I'm not having to do it for you each time. The question just was, what was some of the feedback that you were getting from one another in that storytelling exercise? So what were some of the stories that you're sharing with one another, and what were you finding was memorable and maybe slightly less memorable as well in that exercise?
Can I?
Yes, please do, Norman.
Yeah. So I was with Michael in the room, and we exchanged stories. So the feedback that I got, he wanted more dragons in the story, and and that was great feedback.
Yeah.
And I mean, we deal with financial industry software. So my story was that once upon a time, I named the banker. Tahir, a banker, he was struggling with who to give out loans to, how to make money and keep track of all the loans, so on and so forth. And then he discovered, one day he discovered Noman, who was running this company, who gave a 360-degree view with machine learning, etc., with giving prospects and tracking the entire loan life cycle for him. And he tried the solution and it worked wonders. And for a small piece of the portfolio, there was a growth of about 20% in his portfolio. And finally, the bank turned out to have the largest personal loans portfolio in the country.
Wow.
So that was my story. But
that
then,
was your story or your partner's story?
That was my story.
Your story, yeah.
Yeah. So,
and what was the feedback you got on your story?
So he said it's good that you put numbers in, but he said that it would be nicer if you put more dragons in, because we are talking to a 5-year-old.
Yes.
and I agree.
And if your partner, I think I can see you on the screen, if you can just unmute yourself and just share, why was that important to have more dragons in there? What did you mean by that? Is it Michael, I think, yeah.
Yes, because it should be more emotions, more evil and more good, so people can really understand that what the hero did is very important. That's why we need more heroes. And I also got good advice from Norman, because in my final, she advised me to add real value for my customers, because my final sounded like, and finally we did it. And with help of Norman, now it sounds, and finally we did it, and people like it and use for their businesses. So it was useful for us both.
Sure. So it's almost like finishing the story a little bit when you were saying the kind of "and finally" part. It's just making sure that that's complete for the audience. I think it's an interesting one about wanting more dragons. And I don't know if there's anybody else who had similar feedback from their partner, or you felt that when you were telling your own story. But really, when you're describing what you do, you should be getting your audience hungry enough to hear the solution. If they don't care, if they don't understand the pain of the person you're just talking about, then they're not going to want to know the solution that you're bringing. And if I'm being really dramatic about it, it should be as if you're describing what hell looks like and what heaven looks like, as in, what does the world look like without what you do in it? It should look different. It does look different. So there needs to be this contrast. And one of the things I want to go on to talk about in a second as well is how you get some of that through in your delivery. Because as good as any pitch might be written down, it's really important to make sure that how you're saying it really lands for your audience as well. As I said, I know that a lot of this is happening virtually at the moment. And so most of the time, if you have your camera on, the most you'll be able to see of somebody is like from their head down to the top of their chest. But there is still a lot that you can do to carry the message. And in fact, I would say that what you're doing with your voice vocally becomes even more important. Let's just hear from one more team what feedback they were getting or giving in their pair, and then we'll move on to some more practical stuff. So Nuradin, you've said, I met a fine gentleman who talked about a professor teacher. Can you unmute yourself and just share a little bit more? I'd love to hear more about this fine gentleman who was your partner as well. What a lovely description. So feel free to unmute yourself. I'm not sure if I can still see you in the call actually. So, oh no, I can. Great, go for it when you're ready.
Hi, Ginny. Thanks for the brilliant talk. You're engaging everybody in, as I can see it.
Thank you.
I've been invited by a friend to observe this session, but now I'm involved in it.
Such is the way sometimes, hey?
So my partner was one Mr. Muhammad Ali, and his story is much better than mine. I'd like him to come up and please share his story. That would be a better start, please, Mr.
Let's
Muhammad
do
Ali.
that. Mohammed, would you like to share your story of the group? And then what I do really quickly is just give you some feedback on what you're saying and how you can even get the delivery even stronger. So feel free to share with the rest of us.
Okay, so here goes. Once upon a time, a business school professor was struggling to get students to engage more in class. One day, she discovered a library of short animations which summarized content from business books, articles, and case studies. Because of that discovery, she can easily identify and preview relevant content. And when students see the content, they get interested and participate more in class.
Ooh, this is very interesting. You've got some nods from around the room. And I think that might be because it's really a simple story. I'm not sure many people would not be able to understand what you're saying. I just have a couple of questions which I think might draw out some of this, what you do in an even kind of more colorful way. So one of my questions is, so you talk about students struggling, or a professor struggling to engage their students, what is it about using animations, or particularly having access to a library of animations, which suddenly means that the students are more engaged? I know it sounds a really obvious question, but what does that do for the students' engagement?
So in a very short period of time, it takes a business concept and it communicates it in a visual way, right? So the way that you were, for example, drawing the hero's journey, right? That you're taking something and you're not just telling them about it, but you're actually showing them.
Okay, so it goes from telling to showing by converting something quite conceptual into something visual. I think those are really important details, which just add, just even highlight the importance of what you're bringing. And I think then it almost creates a nostalgic moment. As you were saying that, I was thinking, gosh, I can remember back to lectures that I've listened to or been part of where something was so conceptual that I either don't remember or I didn't engage with it. And I think that might be worth even saying in the beginning when you talk about the students not being engaged and why they aren't engaged, which is that they are being taught very complicated information and it's often not visual or memorable. Could you have a go at telling the story once more for us? And the one thing I'd like you to think about is, so you've got a very nice pace to your voice and a really nice tonality in your voice as well. The thing that I'd love is when you go on to talk about what you do or what this bank or this library of images, is to just add a bit of excitement to your voice. It's kind of like, I always describe to people the moments in your life where you have experienced wonder, whether it's like standing on the top of a mountain or like looking at your newborn child if you have children. That should be how you talk about what you're doing. There should be the same amount of wonder as you were to talk about your child or something that you love. And as startup founders or as people who speak constantly about what you do, it's often one of the hardest things to sound really engaged. So have a go from the top. I'd like you to, can you just say your name as well? And have a go at smiling as you say your name. And then particularly when you go through into the details of this bank of images, of turning things like from conceptual to visual, just lift a little bit of excitement into your voice as well. Go for it.
Okay. So my name is Mohammed, first of all. So once upon a time, a business school professor was struggling to get her students to engage with complicated concepts in class. Then one day, she discovered an entire library of animations that were all very short and very clearly and visually communicated content that was drawn from business books, articles, and case studies. And she was able to identify the correct content. And when she showed it to her students, they all got really excited and engaged in class.
Very, very good. What I'd love to hear really quickly is just some feedback from some of the rest of you. What was the difference? It might even be something quite small or something quite significant. What was the difference in the story that Mohammed just told from the first time you heard it? You've got some other claps from other people as well, so that's always nice to see. Just jump in, unmute yourself, put it on the chat. I don't mind, but it'd be really nice just to give some feedback to Mohammed.
More emphasis on a few words, the action words.
Yeah, great emphasis. Even when you said then one day, it was like you actually put a kind of mark where you went, this is what was happening before, and then something happened and this whole world was opened up. Kristen, I'd love to hear from you just because I saw you really smiling as Mohammed was telling the story the second time. Could you just unmute yourself and give us something of what your thoughts are as well?
Well, yeah, and also it was the second time we heard it. So,
yes.
Yeah, so it's, what I would like to know is how she managed to get the, how did she do it?
How did she access the bank of like the library of information?
Yeah.
Okay.
And how did she find what was the suit? How did she do the matching?
Yeah, great. So there's a couple of questions you just have which fill in some of the gaps of context that you needed.
Which is good though, because then I actually have questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's questions that just are trying to clarify a bit, aren't they? Yeah. I think whenever somebody's confused about something, it's probably not the kind of questions that you want them to have. But if they're trying to clarify, they just want to know more, then it is sometimes quite a good sign. Thank you so much, Kristen, for sharing. And Noradan, you said he was smiling more. That definitely came across. You would have probably heard there was a bit of shift in the tonality in his voice as well. So one thing I'd like to do really quickly, and I think we've got time for this, is just to put you very briefly back into the breakout rooms. You might be in the same ones, you might be in slightly different ones. And just to have a go at saying the same story, but I would really, really like you to think a bit more about how you're saying it this time. So I'm going to give you 2 really quick warm-up exercises. As I said at the beginning of the call, for those of you that missed it, my training is that I originally trained as an actor. So these are 2 things that actors do before they go on stage. The first thing is that I would like you to imagine that you've got a piece of string, which is like in the top of your head. For those of you that I can see, I'm going to ask you to do this with me. For those of you that I can't see, I'm just going to trust that you're doing this as well and looking slightly stupid. So the idea of this exercise, which is just going to be really quick, is just to make sure that when you are presenting, you're either sitting or standing up really nice and tall. Because often people hunch over, and if you've got Zoom fatigue or been on calls all day, it's really, really hard to just be sitting up and using your body language well. So I would like you to imagine that you have a piece of string in the top of your head. And what you're going to do, you're going to look really stupid, but just trust me. You're going to bring your right hand up above your head like this. So try and do it if I can see you on the camera. And then imagine that you're having to pull the piece of string up. So you're pulling it up into the air, good. And then stay nice and tall and bring your arm down to your side. Lovely. And what I can see already is I can see people's necks. I can see somebody just put their camera on at the perfect timing. And suddenly your chest is actually much more open, which is so helpful when especially if you're nervous and you're about to present. What you might realize you sometimes do is take up less space rather than more space. Let's just do that once more because it's quite a nice muscle memory thing. So bring your right hand above your head. Imagine you're pulling a piece of string like it's like a little puppet right into the air. Bring your arm down and see if you can stay like that during this next exercise as well. See if you can stay nice and tall. The next one is all about making sure that you move your mouth properly, that you use all these muscles in your jaw when you're speaking to the person that is in front of you. And one of the things that people sometimes do, especially when they're nervous or just when they're being a little bit lazy, is we mumble what we say. So I would like you to imagine that you've got a piece of toffee which is stuck in your teeth and you're trying to get rid of the toffee or the sweet. So you're just going to do this. And you're moving your tongue in circles one way. And then you're going to come back the other as well. Good. If you've currently got people in the room with you, I'm really sorry, you are looking incredibly silly in front of your friends or your family. The last thing you're going to do is just get your hands either side of your jaw. Give yourself a little bit of a massage just to warm up these muscles here. If you've ever felt really nervous before you were speaking or before you're pitching, what you might feel is you get a lot of tension. Sometimes people get a lot of tension in their jaw muscles or in their neck. So anything you can do to warm up, to relax those muscles is great. Okay, you can stop doing that for now, even though it's very, very funny to watch. So what I hope you are feeling now is that these muscles are a little bit more warmed up and therefore you are much more likely to use them. Think about over-pronouncing your words when you are speaking. It's a really, really helpful thing to do. Let me just think. Actually, do you know what we're going to do? Because we've only got 3 minutes left and I don't want to overrun this call too much. Instead of putting you back into the breakout rooms, I'm going to ask one more person to have a go at sharing their story that they did with their pair. But I just want you to think about over-pronouncing your words. Preferably, I'd love if somebody who's got their camera on could do this, just so we can see you as well. That'd be really, really nice. So one of the 10 people who've got their camera on, if you could just raise your hand for me. So great, okay, go for it, Aljaz.
Yep, I was just unmuting myself. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a teenage student who did not know what to do, and he did not want to do what he was being advised by his parents. So one day, he discovered there's a website that suggests career paths based on one's personality. Because of that, the teenage student was able to design his career path, and finally, he ended up doing what he loves.
Wow, really, really inspiring. Okay, let's get some quick feedback. You've got a thumbs up already. I'd love to hear things that worked really well. What was it that he did either in the delivery or the content of what he said, which allowed the story to really land? If you don't have your camera on, please feel free to get involved. It'd be so nice to hear from some of you. So Imran, Tara, Shamin, get involved in the chat. So you've already said, somebody said he was excited. There was clarity in the words you were saying. Thank you for that, Imran. Anybody else, feel free to give some quick feedback because It's always nice to hear what worked. Hand movements, yes. So you're using your hands all the way through. In fact, I think if you had accidentally muted yourself, I still would have got a sense of what you were saying just from how you were physicalizing what you were doing. What you'll notice is if you have to be slightly further back on the camera for somebody to be able to see your hands, but as soon as you get them in play, it suddenly adds a bit of life. You were concise, you were clear, your energy was inspiring. This is great feedback. And this is probably my favorite bit of feedback so far. There was no ambiguity from Xiaomin just saying that to you. And I think that's the reason I love that piece of feedback is because so often when people pitch their company, there is ambiguity littered everywhere. I know we're almost out of time, and thank you so much for jumping in there and giving us your wonderful story. But I think some of the reflections, and I'd love to hear some of yours as well from this, is just the beauty and the simplicity of a story. I know that this is kind of like the foundation. This is kind of the simplest way of doing your pitch ever. And I wouldn't advise getting in front of an investor and giving them a story exactly as you have just done. But what I'd like you to take forward is to think about the energy that you sometimes need to be able to captivate your audience, and actually where you can use slightly more simplified language to really grab somebody's attention. So what I'd love to hear from you guys, just as we wrap this up, is one thing that you would like to do moving forwards that you'll be doing in terms of pitching. So either something on the delivery side of things, or on the way you're putting together how you explain your problem and solution. Just write down one thing in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself, something you would like to be doing differently. Thank you for things that are coming in. We've got things about
practicing and practicing.
Practicing and practicing. Thank you, Imran. And within that, what's one thing that you would like to practice well, or practice doing as you're doing your pitch? Imran, can you unmute yourself again? I'd love to just hear a little bit more on that.
So I was pitching in an event some time back, and that was my first pitch ever to investors.
Wow.
And I saw other companies pitching, and I saw a huge difference in my pitch and their pitch. And one thing which I took away from that event was that they had really practiced it well, and I was just doing it for the first time, so I wasn't fully prepared. So
great.
Most of people just said it has to be just like muscle memory. When you pitch, it has to be just like muscle memory.
Absolutely. It often is all about the muscle memory side of things. I think you're right as well about practicing it well. So sometimes some of the hardest clients I work with are ones that have practiced a pitch very badly, and you're having to unwrap some habits that they come to their pitch with. Some other things I'm loving in the chat, Xiaomin, you said, pulling myself up from the head and rolling my tongue. If somebody had just come into the conversation, that sounds incredibly weird, but thank you for feeding that in. So the string that you just...
I have one question.
Yeah, go for it, please ask. Yes, go for it.
So I usually, when I'm doing a pitch, the area where I lag is when I'm closing it. I've heard people tell me that my pitch is always pretty good, but I don't close it well. So,
And have they given you any feedback on what in particular is not meaning that it's closed well or feels like it's finished?
Yeah, exactly. And sorry, I joined in 30 minutes late, so I'm just catching up. Maybe you covered it, but I just wanted to know, how to close a pitch properly.
Okay, so how are you closing pitch properly? So I would say, just as a general rule of thumb, and if you need to go, please feel free to go. If not, I'm happy to take a few Q&As for those of you that want to stay on the call. But just some quick tips on how to finish a pitch well. I think the energy that you start with, you need to either end on the same energy or even higher. Where a pitch feels like it's tailed off in terms of the energy, where it feels like that awkward moment where if you're doing it in front of a live audience and they don't know whether to clap or not, a pitch should never feel like that. You're hopefully either leaving them with something inspiring or giving them a sense of the vision that you have going forward with your company. So it might be that you write out what your vision statement is and you end on that, or you leave them with something inspiring about how you want to change the world or how you want to change the industry that you operate in. But something quite short and sweet. I think one of the mistakes I sometimes see people making is ending on a really long sentence. And because it's the end of your pitch and you're probably running out of energy and breath, that's where it feels like it's falling apart rather than ending on a real elation moment. So yeah, so I think it's often Short, sharp
Exactly.
sentences,
Exactly.
give it loads of energy. Yeah, I hope that helps a bit. And somebody's recommended Zig Ziglar Secrets of Closing a Sale, so that might be one to check out for you as well. Any other Q&As, feel free to either write them in the chat or unmute yourself. I'm very happy to take a few questions now. Kristen,
I have a quick...
go for it, and then we'll come to Ajaz on the side.
Yeah, so I don't usually do pitches because I work as a bureaucrat, but I do listen to a lot, and I also might, try to do it myself now. But one of the things that I feel that it's a bit sad is that how they speak English is kind of, or how so people that don't speak English very well, they don't do the pitch that well. I mean, how can we get rid of that bias, like in the language section? That if you have problems either with your pronunciations or it seems like you don't come through as somebody that knows your product because you don't necessarily know the language as well. As
So it's a question on how, as somebody who's not a native English speaker, do you come across as really knowing your product or just being able to carry your message?
Confident. Yeah.
Okay. I think, well, in part, there's only so much you can do about people's biases. And a good book to read is Blinked, which by Malcolm Gladwell, which talks a lot about the impressions that people make of you. I would say that I every time I speak to people have to try and combat certain biases because I'm young and I'm a female and I work with tech entrepreneurs who are normally, not all the time, but often male and slightly older. And there is some things that I can do and some things that are outside of my control. And I think whatever is within your grasp to try and really practice well, as somebody has already mentioned, and getting people who you trust, who are maybe native English speakers, to give you feedback. So one thing that's quite helpful is getting somebody to listen to you pitch and just identifying which words are slightly harder to say with the accent that you have or with some of the ways that you naturally pronounce words. And just maybe working with somebody on how you might be able to say those words a little bit clearer. So some of the exercises I just gave you, like warming up your muscles in your face and thinking about removing the toffee from your teeth, that's a really good one just to make sure that your tongue, your lips and your teeth are always all working really well together. So you're sort of spitting out what you're saying. But otherwise, yeah, getting feedback from somebody else is quite helpful. Carrying confidence yourself when you're pitching. What you sort of talked about there really briefly is the internal narrative that people have as well, which is that the external narrative is everything I kind of say out of my mouth. And there's obviously this internal dialogue that goes on in my head, which sometimes people carry with them on stage, which says, it's almost like an imposter syndrome thing of, I'm not good enough, I might not be able to do this. People might think I don't know my company well enough or whatever else. And I think it's sometimes important to address that and work out what things are part of that as well. Does that help in some way? Yeah.
Yeah, but but I also think that that's one of the negative side about pitching, because it doesn't say anything about the product. If it's and you don't really want to hire actresses or actors to do the pitch, right? I mean, it has to be
you, and it has to be authentic. Yeah, for sure. I think there is a way of finding your authenticity as a communicator, but maybe sometimes amplifying some of the things that you would normally do, because it is different when you're pitching to an audience of even like a handful of people. It's very different to a conversation that you would have normally with a friend. So I think it's thinking about what things can you amp up a little bit. Let's just take one more question before we wrap up. So if somebody else wants to jump in, either write it in the chat or unmute yourself. Actually, Ajaz, did you have something you wanted to say? Yeah, go for it.
Yes, thank you. So this pitch is good for icebreaker, but when they're pitching to the investors, they're more interested in the business model.
Yeah.
So how do we get that fused into this?
Okay, very, very good question. So the storytelling technique that I took you through is to, one, help you think about how you can describe what you do really simply. And it's also something that might be helpful when you're talking about your team or your traction, because those are the other parts of the pitch which can often either be the most exciting or the most depressing to hear. So I would also think about how you talk about your team in a really compelling way, and how you talk about your traction like it's actually good news. And of course, yes, then investors they will have, depending on where they come from, what their background is, they will have specific things they need you to go into quite a lot of detail with. One thing I would say is that people often assume that investors are most often very intelligent people, but we make assumptions that they will understand everything we say if we talk to them at our normal level. So one thing I would encourage you guys to do is to think about how much knowledge does this person have? If you're speaking to investor X, what is their level of expertise or knowledge? And then see if you might need to get rid of some of the jargon that you normally use, or give context to some of the language that you would normally talk in, just so that they don't misunderstand you. Because people tend not to say when they don't understand, because they don't like to feel stupid. So I think it's thinking about just framing things in the right way. And of course, go into detail on your business model, give us the financials, make sure that people get exactly what they've come into the meeting asking for. But where you can, my headline to you guys is, see if you can flavor some of what you're saying with stories, with pictures, with emotion, with energy. And but please don't neglect that you still need to go into some of the statistics and nitty gritty. The reason I do all the storytelling stuff is because people are normally quite good on the detail side of things. And just sometimes it's helpful to go through in a bit more detail the storytelling side of things as well. Oh, great book suggestion. Somebody said Donald Miller's book, Building a Story Brand. I would hugely recommend that. And the other book I'd recommend, which I'll just write in the chat, is Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. Anybody who's got any other books, feel free to add them in, because there's always it's always nice to have a bit of a reading list from some of these webinars. Oh, sorry, I just messaged that privately to somebody, so I will just put that in the main session instead. Okay, we're going to wrap up there. I am hoping to do another of these in a couple of weeks' time. So what we'll be doing in the next session is going into a little bit more detail on things like your investor pitches. So if you're wanting to join on to the next webinar, then we'll get some information out across to you in the next couple of days. If you have any questions off the back of this, then get in touch with me or Shah on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect with you guys. Otherwise, stay safe, have a lovely rest of your evening, and thank you for getting so involved this evening, for doing some stupid, weird, wonderful things. It's really been a lot of fun, so thank you. Take care, guys.